when people are really depressed? You don't know. I have this friend who
Uh-huh.
suffers from clinical depression, let's call it that. Most jovial, personable person in the world. It's
Right.
like go to the grocery store with him. He's speaking with everybody. He wants to communicate with anyone, but call him 3 days later. He's not going to answer the phone
Right. Right.
because
That's my
in
point.
his
Yeah.
head. Exactly. So if someone tells you they're depressed, believe them because
Hmm.
it's not a sentiment that people or feeling that people want to share with anyone, not even the people closest to them. Like the worst thing we could do is to isolate and try to handle it by ourselves when we're depressed.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to episode 52 of the Let's Start Healing podcast. We have more in common than we think, and what we have in common can change the world. Probably the number one thing that I want to accomplish with this podcast is for whoever's listening to understand that they are not alone, that we indeed have more in common than we think. And my next few episodes, I'm really, really excited about bringing you these guests that I feel speak to that. The episode today includes helpful tools to move through periods of sadness and depression. And I really wanted to talk about this because of the time of year we're in, because of the year that we've had. And I asked a friend who I know had come through some depression, and she's a pretty transparent person. And I asked her if she would talk to me about her experience a little bit and how she got through it. She shares a great deal in a short period of time. And her name is Rhoda, and I just can't wait for you to meet her. And she brings up a few things that I want to speak to. One thing she brought up is a book by Louise Hay called Heal Thy Body. And it's a really thin paperback book. And a lot of people know of Louise Hay, and then a lot of people don't. So I just wanted to mention she was a publisher of a great many spiritual books. And this book, Heal Thy Body, speaks to how our ailments actually come from a negative emotion that we're experiencing or a negative thought that we're experiencing. And there's a list throughout the book that pertains to each part of the body, and say it could be your back, which is one of the things that Rhoda and I discuss. And the back represents support. So oftentimes, if we have back pain, it can speak to a feeling of a lack of support in our lives. In the Louise Hay book, Heal Thy Body, it might have a thought, a negative thought that we might be thinking if we have back pain. And then beside that thought, it will have a healing thought to replace that mindset, the negative mindset that may have brought the pain about. So Rhoda is an amazing person. She was married for a number of years, and she divorced when her twin girls were little, and so she raised them as a single mom, and they both went off to Ivy League colleges and graduated and are phenomenal women in their careers. I just think that she's a pretty incredible person, but I love how she is so willing to speak to just some of the moments that we can feel when we're down. And also, we were talking virtually, and there were some things that I had to leave out because we were having some audio issues. So there were some things that I had to edit out that was powerful that she was talking about. But you still get so much from what we were able to include. And so let's meet her. Let's get started, and let's start healing. Well, welcome, Rhoda.
Thank you, Adrian.
I appreciate you doing this and being on this episode with me. And I've been wanting to have a conversation about depression because it's something that I've dealt with on and off throughout my life. Less now than when I was younger. And I'm not talking about clinical depression, major depression, but I think that depression seems like something that we don't often talk about until somebody dies by suicide. Like we were talking on the phone, I had mentioned Anthony Bourdain or Kate Spade. There was a lot of talk about depression after that. Even when Robin Williams died, I think there was a lot of conversation about depression, although he had a disease he was coping with too. But it just seems like we don't talk about it unless somebody well known loses their life as a result of it. And it could be a very isolating feeling, I think, when we go through, people who experience depression are going through it. And even now, this morning, when I was thinking about the topic and I was thinking about some people in my life that I know who experience depression, I have one close friend that I didn't even think to talk to her about this episode. There's absolutely no way in the world she would appear on this episode to talk about this topic because it's so private. And I don't think that somebody would look at me or somebody would look at her and automatically think, oh, well, they have experiences of depression. And I think we all just have these at times, these periods where we're just down or we feel alone or we're just going through whatever we're going through. Especially now during this pandemic, I want to speak to it. I know that in the past, you came through some down times. And so I'm really grateful for you just sharing whatever wisdom you have or comments you have.
Depression, situational depression, happens in most people's lives. A divorce, some people lose their kids, which I think is probably the hardest experience a human could have. And it helps to be able to have a support system and to be able to have some tools to use. I mean, when I went through my depression, it was situational.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea that people could feel like the isolation, the disappointment, because people you think would understand and be there when, or for me, I'm going to make this personal, didn't show up the way
You broke up a little bit. We're talking virtually, and you said, I heard you say that people didn't show up the way you hoped or thought they would, and then you said it's just something
that people don't know how to show up, right? It's awkward. People may know of a life situation that I'm dealing with, but they don't really know how to show up. And what I then did was to isolate myself and figure, okay, I'm going to feel this. It's like it comes in waves, so it's like a feeling that you think that I would think is manageable, and then the next minute I'm either on my knees or on the floor in a fetal position, and just feeling the pain. Is instances like that. It was just this instant. It's not like, let me get through this hour and then the next hour I'll be okay. It's minute by minute. And I was walking this week and thinking about it and realizing that depression, mental mood swings, it all comes in waves. And the ability to know, this is in retrospect, that this is a wave. I will feel this feeling. It will not kill me. I'm not going to die because I'm feeling so distressed, pain, fear.
Mm-hmm.
But I will get through it, right? I remember trying to go up the stairs to get from my office and not having the strength, the physical strength to walk up the stairs.
Yeah.
And wondering, will I ever be able to walk up the stairs again? Just like that.
Yeah.
And went up, got the document I was looking for, and came downstairs and wondering, God, how am I going to do this? And maybe 6 months later, I thought, oh, you did it. You can do this. It's like being able to go from multitasking and handling 5, 6 things in my head and physically at the time to not being able to get up off the floor in a fetal position. That was my experience of depression. Now, it was brought on by life situations, mother dying, divorce, all happening in the same year. But at no point did I feel suicidal. But pain from my toes to my head, and especially in my heart and in my stomach, right?
Yes.
But what do you hold on to? What did I hold on to help me through it? Because I know right now, 2020, lots of people are facing so many daunting, fearful experiences, from
Right.
death. I think of all the people who are so afraid right now. The experiences are there, the financial loss, all that is there. But how do we support each other through it? The first thing I did was knowing I couldn't handle this by myself. And I am not one to take medication, but I spoke to the doctor and I got Zoloft. I knew when I got it that I would only use it for 6 months, and
Right.
worked on healthier ways, right? So eating right, drinking my water, meditation, prayer, feeling the feelings,
Yep.
knowing that if I was on the floor in my house in a fetal position, there was no place else to go, right? Where could
Right.
I?
You mentioned to me prior to this conversation that when you were on the floor, it was that you didn't have the energy, didn't you say, to get in the bed?
I didn't feel safe in the bed.
You didn't feel the bed could support you.
Could support me physically or emotionally. So I had this really old comforter that I put it on the floor in front of the bed and just would be on that comforter in a fetal position. And I could stay there for hours.
And this
But
isn't because of any weight issue, it's because of the deep sadness, depression that you were feeling. I want people to understand that.
yeah, the lack of support, the feeling of that was the safest place. But I would have like Wayne Dyer meditation going in the background. So that was the calming, his voice, remember his voice. That was calming to me. So it would be on repeat.
It's funny that you mention him because Wayne Dyer, because I think I'm coming through a period of feeling down. And Wayne Dyer, I've been listening to Wayne Dyer for 2 weeks in the morning. Wayne Dyer's voice helps me get up out of the bed in the morning. Yes, it's what he says, but it's also the sound of his voice for me. I mean,
Yes.
you might like his voice for a different reason, but for me, I just love, he's human. He's a man. He passed away, but he's human. He's a man. He's masculine. He's just got all these dynamics. And the words that he's saying are so powerful. His point is just feels and is so true. So
Yes.
yeah, I definitely get it. I listen to a little every day.
Yeah. And when I got stronger, I came to realize that even though I didn't feel like doing anything, if I could just sit in the sun and stare in space or wherever, just sit in the sun, it brought relief from anxiety
Mm-hmm.
and made me feel stronger.
Right.
And so I would do that at home. And later on, when I felt even stronger, I would go to the park and sit on this big rock in the park with a bottle of water in the sun.
Mm-hmm.
I was just amazed at the healing that came from that. I was determined to get my healing as naturally as possible.
Yeah.
And later on, I went to the river and sat there I'm pretty sure it was sitting in the sun. But then I realized that the water was amazing. The
Mm.
healing I got sitting
Yes.
right there.
Yes.
Then I was reminded of those hymns, right? I'm going to go down to the river and let it take all my sorrows. I mean,
Yeah,
that stuff is real,
it is.
really real. So after that, and this is how my healing progressed, I would go to the river for 3, 4 hours at a time.
Hmm.
And it was just unbelievable healing.
Yeah.
Just, I was amazed. You hear it, but to practice is something completely different. Between the sunlight and the water,
Hmm.
I was able to take myself off of the antidepressant and start the healing process. But I had tools. Those were the tools
Right.
that I used. And my addiction is sugar. I would eat things that I didn't, that I knew weren't
Yes.
good for me.
Yes. I have that problem.
And I
Hmm.
knew why I was doing it. But I would forgive myself. Tomorrow will be better, you know?
Yeah.
And I would wake up with that intention that
Hmm.
tomorrow I will treat myself better. Because I also know that that I would get to a certain point where I wouldn't like myself because of the damage I would have done to my body. For me, it's a sugar thing. It would be diabetes, name it, whatever. I try to be honest with myself,
Right.
and know why I was doing certain things and to ease pain, but did not have the luxury of
Right.
continuing
Right.
to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
12 steps is a big help with that, I think, too, in terms of just trying to take things a day at a time and
Hmm.
also asking for help. Because I know I might not have a sweet sugar addiction, although I do like sweets, but I have a munching thing, which very well that I love to munch and love potato chips
Uh-huh.
and and then if I don't have potato chips, I'll eat nuts or something where I can munch. But I think a part of the healing process I'm finding is that if I relapse and have potato chips or I have nuts, like the other day I had some nuts and they're not satisfying anymore. They're not satisfying. Like I'm trying to get that quote unquote high that I had before, that really they don't give me that high anymore. And I have this sort of like I'm able to separate from myself a little bit and see I feel terrible. I ate these nuts and they're not good on my stomach. It's like you start getting perspective, like why am I, just putting poison, into me, or why am I just giving myself pain and I'm not even getting
Exactly.
any joy out of it. There's no joy in pain. It's just pain. So I think that as time
That's
goes
right.
on, part of the healing is we get some perspective comes to what we like to indulge
Absolutely.
in. Hmm.
Emotions Anonymous. Later on, I discovered Emotions Anonymous, and I found that to be very, very helpful. In Atlanta, the one that I went to was at Ridgeview Hospital. I would go to those meetings 5 days a week, and I found them to be so helpful. People who were healing, people who
Yeah.
had just been admitted to the hospital for one reason or the other. Whatever is bothering us, it
Hmm.
affects, or it started with our emotions, right? Eating disorder, uh, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, most it's all caused by something we're feeling, right? So for
And
me
thoughts we're
to
telling ourselves.
exactly. So I found that to be really, really purposeful and filled with hope. Um,
Was it healing? Like, I mean, because I've been to 12-step groups and I find the healing through the listening, sharing, of course, but through the listening. Is that where the healing came from? Is that when you say it's so helpful and in that same way of listening, or what was the healing? How did the healing
it
come
was
about?
it was the association with the other people in the group the communication. It felt like a community. The sharing of feelings. It's like, when I showed up, I was open, I was vulnerable, I was authentic, willing to heal, willing to read the book, to do all of the little exercises, and to show up to support and be supported. It was, well, we all knew that something wasn't working, and to be able to share
Mm-hmm.
their experiences, our feelings, our hopes, it was just beautiful. And I went for 9 months and 3 to 5 days a week to work on becoming emotionally whole.
Mm-hmm.
Because I used to be a caretaker and one of these people that showed up with too much empathy, if there's such a thing. It helped me get on a path of self-love. I
Right.
can't give what I don't have, and so Emotions Anonymous was a really place for me to end.
Yes, I think that a lot of people you're an empath, I'm an empath. I think a lot of people who are empaths don't know, or who are givers don't realize that they have to protect themselves because we can become depleted. And self-love is a really big part of the component. It's essential, especially if it's essential, period, but especially if you're an empath.
I agree. And a connection to whoever you think God is, right? I
Yes.
find to be able to balance that and create a physical existence based on that has been for me the path to gratitude and kindness. And these days I think of the simple things of life. To be able to breathe, to be able to walk, and to know that I can be helpful, but the first person I have to help is myself. Our world is in a precarious place. Of course, people are depressed.
It's so hard because I think everybody has their own load and people manage it
Mm-hmm.
differently. Just in this moment, I'm thinking, well, what can we do? And maybe we can try to be better listeners. I don't know in what way that maybe I'm not a good listener when I'm talking to someone. I try to be. I know that when I try to share, I was talking to a friend about what I was experiencing a few weeks ago. And I said that I was experiencing some depression. And then later the friend said, well, maybe you are going through some depression, but it was as if it wasn't real, as if it wasn't true to that
Mm.
person. I remembered I had this therapist several years ago, like 20 years ago. She's the best therapist I ever had. But yet I remember, and I was living in New York, and then she was my therapist in New York, and I moved here, and I would still do phone sessions with her. And then I went to New York back to visit, and I went to see her when I went back to visit. And I had told her that I had been experiencing some depression, and this is 20 plus years ago. And when she saw me, she instantly said, "You're not experiencing depression." Told me that I wasn't depressed. It was because of my demeanor. And so I think, and I know that she had treated people who were clinically depressed in major, major depression. I think also my whole point is that we can't just go by, how somebody looks on the outside, because we do what we have to do to show up in the world.
Absolutely. People will always show you their best selves, even if they're just barely holding it together. But in the moments when people are really depressed, you don't know. I have this friend who
Uh-huh.
suffers from clinical depression, let's call it that. Most jovial, personable person in the world. It's
Right.
like go to the grocery store with him. He's speaking with everybody. He wants to communicate with anyone, but call him 3 days later. He's not going to answer the phone
Right. Right.
because
That's my
in
point.
his
Yeah.
head. Exactly. So if someone tells you they're depressed, believe them because
Mm-hmm.
it's not a sentiment that people are feeling that people want to share with anyone, not even the people closest to them. Like the worst thing we could do is to isolate and try to handle it by ourselves when we're depressed.
And that's my point, exactly what you just said. And that we just never know what somebody else is going through.
We're not okay. If we
Yeah.
are paying attention, we know that none of us are okay.
The point you made was we never know what someone is going through. That's the one point that I want to emphasize. And the other is that if you are going through something like that, you're not the only one. You're not alone. You're not, because it's so easy to think I'm the only one in the world who's feeling like this. And it's so easy to bring some shame to it. But there's nothing to be ashamed of. And you're not the only one who's going through something like this. So you're not alone in what you're feeling, although it feels like you're alone.
Right. And that was one of the benefits of going to Emotions Anonymous. Other people are dealing with stuff. Life comes in cycles, and people are
Right.
always going through something that I'm just coming out of or I'm just about to get into. To live with that awareness is also part of the wisdom, right? That
Mm-hmm.
this is how it goes. They say be kind to the next person you meet because they either have been through something, going through something, or just about to get into something. So how can I be of support? But you can't be of support unless you know. But I feel as if we can just be vulnerable, there's such beauty in that.
I don't know if this relates to depression so much, but I thought of it when you were bringing it up. I don't know if I ever told you, our friend Catherine, who passed away some years ago
Mm-hmm.
now. And one of my biggest regrets, in fact, it shifted me after she died. I didn't know until you told me, when you told me that she had passed, that she had cancer, although she didn't die of cancer. She drowned in the bathtub. I think she passed around the month of July, somewhere in there. I remember you told me about her passing, and I hadn't talked to her since May. And we would talk sometimes. We would try to get together, but I was so busy. I was so busy in my job that I didn't always make time for conversations with her. And then when we would get together, it would just be kind of surface. And I think that if I had made time, I had no idea that she had cancer or how she was approaching it, my understanding, in a natural way. And if I had made time, if I had been a different type of friend, then I believe she would have told me that she had cancer. And it's something that I'll always regret. And it shifted the way I want to be with my friends. How we show up as friends, is important.
It's important because friends, if we don't have each other, there's no one else looking out for us. People
Yeah.
get busy, become acquaintances, and you can go to a party with people, but that's a party, right? Have a real conversation with your friend and say, how are you doing? How is it going? Opens it up and allows people to walk through and tell us how they're really feeling. I have 3 people that I communicate with, one on a daily basis, 75-year-old friend of mine, just to make sure that she's okay. Because I always checked in, but now I check in with more intention. I really want to know how you're dealing with the loneliness, the pandemic, those sort of things, because right now it's like we're all just trying to survive. And it's a very interesting time to be on the planet for sure. It makes me in a way realize what's important. To be able to go for a nice walk, feel my body, my legs move. Because back in the spring, I was on my back and in my bed for like 7 days. And I thought, oh my God, just like with depression, which is a disease of the mind, the back healing was important. And I started slowly, going for a 5-minute walk, and 15-minute walk, and just being gentle with myself. And
Right. And some
I'm being
people
that
may not
positive.
realize that the back represents support. So you were
Exactly.
being gentle with yourself in that area of support.
I pulled my Louise Hay book, but I
Yeah.
already knew that the lower back was about support
Mm.
and physical, financially, emotionally, the whole bit. The deal for most people, I think, is to fall into cracks that are hard to get out of, right? So it's like, if like with the sugar, if I'm eating all this sugar, and this is how I'm taking care of my emotions, to know that if I keep doing this for 6 weeks, I'm going to be in trouble.
I want to repeat what you just said because you broke up a little bit. You said to find a way to balance.
To balance so that we don't end up digging deeper holes that we need to get out of. We're all dealing with something, and it's not an easy space, but we can make decisions in our lives, and I'm sure people are doing it, that will put them in an even deeper space than of depression and despair than we all are in right
Right.
now.
Well, I'm so grateful and thank you so much for talking about this. Before we end, I want to ask you one question. I have healing questions. You know, the podcast is called Let's Start Healing. So, when do
Okay.
you know that you are having an experience with God? Like, when do you feel the presence of God? And with this question, earlier this week for the first time, because I feel like I've heard all of Wayne Dyer's talks by now, but I heard him say something for the first time I hadn't heard when I was listening this week, and he mentioned, relating to my question, that knowing of God is when we have an experience of conscious contact, and so I want to bring that into the question. When do you
Mhm.
know you're having conscious contact with God?
Well, I always feel aware of source, higher power, God. When I'm walking and I'm breathing deeply, and especially when it's sunshiny and 64 degrees or whatever, and I breathe deeply and I hold it and I let it out and I breathe again, and that's the connection. I walk quite a bit, and I have that experience of being completely aware, feeling at ease, feeling grateful, feeling in my body and being grateful that nothing's hurting. All of that is all
Yeah.
part of that experience. But it really is in breathing, the deep breath, looking up at a blue sky, sunshine, whatever. But that breath is really what makes me feel that I am part of that. It's part of me, and just complete gratitude.
Beautiful. Thank you for joining us. You can listen to all of our podcast episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and our podcast YouTube channel. And remember, whatever platform you listen on, be sure to subscribe. Also, you can send me an email at letstarthealingpodcast@gmail.com. See you next time. Let's start healing.